Okay.
So first, good afternoon, everybody. Good morning for our friends from California. It's a great pleasure to be with you. And, I'm not sure how is the weather in California, but I can tell you it's a very rainy day, not very good weather in Lisbon. I don't know what's better to have the students motivated. So when it's sunny, I'm always afraid that they would rather go to the beach. And when it's raining, at least, there's less alternatives. So it is a pleasure to welcome Susana and John. We met them last time they were in Lisbon. Clearly, they're coming back to Lisbon soon. And in the meantime, they have agreed to share their wisdom and their great experience in prototyping using the design thinking methodology. So thank you very much, Susana and John, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Celine, and thank you, Pierre. Yes, we are right near San Francisco, and we're lucky. It's a beautiful California sunny day. I am Jonathan Littman. We're going to talk about prototype startup sales with this design thinking. And of course, here is
Susana Camp.
And let's get started. So my background originally was a journalist, a tech journalist, and then an author. And I've written 10 books. Many of you have heard a lot about computer hackers. I wrote 2 bestsellers about notorious criminal hackers who I think of sort of as the criminal entrepreneur. They were very creative, very ingenious. This led me to work with IDEO. If you haven't heard of IDEO, I encourage you to learn more. Escrevi Arte de Inovação, Des Caras de Inovação, The Art of Innovation, and 10 Faces of Innovation. This is a company that really pioneered design thinking and really thinking about the experience of products and services and how to understand the customer with empathy. They, of course, originated very close to Stanford University. And Susana will tell you about herself.
Yes, we also, the two of us wrote a book together in recent years, but just to give you a little sense of my background, I was also a tech journalist. I started my career at Wired magazine. We created the banner ad for better or worse. So there's a little sample of that in the screen. I write about tech. I've worked for PC World, Mac World, various tech magazines. I also do tech. I'm a front-end web developer, and I've been lately dabbling in blockchain and Web3. I am also a Harvard-trained instructional designer, so I teach people how to create the best kinds of online courses. And we're going to talk a little bit today about just a little bit about our book, but a little more about other things that we know about sales and we want to pass on.
So to succeed, you have to be a salesperson. And we both know, and I think many of you know, you don't often learn a lot about sales in academics, in high school, in university. So we're going to share a bit of what we learned on this topic. I happened to meet Perry Claiborne several years ago. He is the founder of something we'll tell you quite a bit about called Stanford Launchpad, which is fascinating because it's actually a college course, but it's also an accelerator. It's just 10 weeks. And he was a student many years ago under David Kelly, who's the founder of IDEO, the founder of the famous D School or Design School at Stanford, which is a multidisciplinary school to apply design thinking. But he started just as you are in a class, and he had to come up with a product for that class. And he happened to be up in this Sierra Nevada near San Francisco, and he had a bad ankle, so he could not ski. So he tried snowshoeing. And he discovered the products were old and made of wood and inferior. So he started to apply what he was learning at the D School to create a product. The interesting thing was his fellow students didn't want to create real products. They just wanted to do a class project. But he became obsessed, as most startup entrepreneurs are. And you can see in the pictures here, he began prototyping with more modern materials. And then every week he would go to the mountains because he had to, of course, test each iteration of this product. Well, he was a talented engineer. He was obsessed. He created a great product, but guess what? He couldn't sell it. He didn't know how to sell. And he also discovered there was a problem. Often with a product, you need an ecosystem. You need partners. You need an environment to sell that product. And so he discovered he had to essentially invent an ecosystem to sell snowshoes, because you could not snowshoe at downhill ski resorts and other centers. So you can see in these images, he started partnering with ski resorts to open these places. He came up with a whole experience of what this was all about, and this became Atlas. And within several years, he had a company that he was able to sell for many millions of dollars from a class project. And from this, he became inspired to become a phenomenal teacher at Stanford.
Yes, so after a career in business, he created the Stanford Launchpad. This is a sales accelerator, and you can see Perry here in the right with some students, and on the left is his co-professor Jeremy Utley. We embedded ourselves for 2 years in their classes so we could learn everything about it. Now, this is a
see you guys, the two of you.
No,
Oh.
no, Pierre, I can see it.
I can see everyone.
Yeah,
I
me
can
too.
see
Yeah,
it.
we
Pierre.
can
I can
see
see
it.
it.
Oh, okay.
Está bom? Agora?
Yeah,
It's
everything is okay. Yeah.
Tudo bem.
Well,
Okay.
we'll keep going since everyone can see. Most people can see except for Pierre. Just trust us. Okay, so it's a program for accelerating sales. Now, in this program, you need to learn to sell before you're ready. You don't have a product yet. You're creating a product in a team, and this product must be scalable. So that's a definition of a startup. It's not just any product. You have to incorporate as a business in order to pass this class. You have to pitch to investors in the second class of this 10-week program. So you are already learning how to pitch to investors, but more than that, you're learning how to sell your product. Halfway through the class, there's an event called Night Launch, where you have to come out of that event with new customers.
So now we'd like to hear from you. So in the chat,
We like to be interactive when we have when we present things. So it's your turn. Let us know, how do you now, if you have a product, or how will you accelerate sales for your startup? Just don't think too hard on it. Throw some ideas into the chat. Networking.
good,
Yes.
good.
Great idea. Start with your network. Create a community. Yes, we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go on. Partnerships.
Partnerships.
Exactly. Word of mouth. Wow, you guys are great.
Finding partners.
Google Ads. Oh, yes.
We're going to talk about that
We're
in a
going to
little
talk
bit.
about that too.
Excellent. Great.
That's great. If you have more thoughts, save that great brainstorming. We're doing more chats later. A great story. Yes, storytelling. We're storytellers. We love stories. Ready, John? Should
Yep.
we go?
Okay. So in America, when you're a young boy, a young girl, your first sales opportunity is often what we call the lemonade stand. On a summer day, it's very hot, and often with your parents' help, you make a little bit of lemonade, and for the people walking by your home, you sell lemonade for 10 cents, 25 cents. What's fascinating is that Stanford Launchpad, at this great university, they use this method. And you can think of it as a metaphor, but you can also think of it like an athlete. You need to train your sort of sales muscle. So let's take a look at how they do this. So a few weeks into class, when they're already encouraging them to sell their real product, their real service to real clients, they surprise them one day and they pull back sort of a screen, and they have all the material for them to sell lemonade on the Stanford campus. And they give them a very little time, an hour and a few minutes, and each team has to come up with essentially a strategy. And the urgency is extreme. So they have to be smart, and they have to figure out how to sell lemonade. And we're talking real dollars. And here's how it works. There are 10 teams, and they tell them, if you win, you of course keep your money, but you get everyone else's money. So it's very competitive, very American. And you can see this young woman is writing a tagline, and they're all getting ready to go. So let's take a look. Well, normal doesn't win. Average doesn't win. Mediocre doesn't win, especially when there are 10 teams, and these are MBAs or graduate students at Stanford. So this young man, he's very collegial. He's meeting pretty ladies at Stanford. I don't think he's going to win the contest. This is average. Okay. So let's go on. Tell us, what would you do? What would be your unique selling proposition? How would you win the lemonade sales challenge? Design, interaction, engagement. Don't forget that as well. Give us your ideas now. Be as crazy and creative as you want. All you have to do is win. Okay, what do we got? Who's got an idea to win the lemonade sales challenge?
Are you going to put your lemonade in a pitcher and go sit outside at a table and say, hello, anybody?
What's your method? A drinking contest.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
I love that idea. That is so funny.
Dress team members as a unicorn. Wow. Okay.
With
Excellent.
A reward.
A reward.
Use the kids.
Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful.
You guys, I think you would be fierce competitors in this
Okay.
contest.
Okay. Emotional selling. Yes. Supporting students. Excellent. So there's a purpose. There's a motivation. The human element.
Okay. Should we move on, John?
Yes. Here we
Okay.
go. So
Great ideas so far. Thank you.
Here we have design thinking, what we call lemonade plus. Okay, the average person just sells lemonade. I'm going to tell you about this team in a second, but I'll tell you first about another team. So one team went out and they told them they were an all-female team, and they said their pitch was support female entrepreneurs at Stanford. They weren't really selling lemonade. They were selling the idea of, we are a startup and support us. And this team raised about $400 in 1 hour, really selling female entrepreneurship. A second team did Lemonade Plus. They realized it was still the morning, so they went to a dormitory filled with students who sleep in like most college students, but then need to wake up. So they added caffeine powder to make it truly a stimulating caffeine-like lemonade. And in 1 hour, they raised $690. All of this, of course, sounds unbeatable, but then we get to this team in front of you right here. And they went to actually the part of Stanford, which is the business school. So fellow business students. So They went to a target audience, right? You have to have a target customer. They went straight there. This young woman realized she had a weapon. She had a puppy. So everyone loves puppies. So she brought the puppy out. So it was lemonade plus puppy. They were able to turn on music to make it a sensory, emotional experience. So they turned on music from their dorm room and they got out there and immediately they saw and interacted with a stop sign. A bureaucrat at Stanford said, now, you are not allowed to sell anything on campus. You can't sell. It's against the rules. But these are entrepreneurs, and they decided they would accept donations for their project. And thus, there was no set price. So instead of $5 or $10, pretty soon they had a donation of $50, a donation of $100. One person donated $200. Within this 1 hour, they raised $2,560 to take the grand prize. And with all the other students, they raised over $4,500 for their startup in 1 hour selling lemonade. Here they are counting the money. and we saw this with our own eyes. It was kind of hard to believe. And of course, none of this is possible if you just do it the mediocre, average way without thinking about design.
A little more about Stanford. It's not all just going out and selling lemonade and having fun. They also set a challenge to the students. It's called the 10X challenge, where the students have to 10X their sales for their startup. Now you can do this yourself. You can set yourself a goal, say within X period of time, I'm going to increase my sales by X amount. And how are you going to do that? You're going to look at your data. You're going to look at your sales. You can't go 10X without knowing what 1X is. So you, as you can see on this board, they're tracking their sales to date, the offers made, what's coming in that sales funnel. The conversion rate is very important. So you're going to start to track all these things, and maybe you're going to need to pivot a little bit, and you're going to have to think of some new ways to sell.
And just
John's going to tell us a little more.
One more thing I want to mention, they actually do this the same time they have the lemonade sales. And then they make the point, the professors, that many of you sold more in lemonade than you sold your own startup in weeks, which drives home the point of sales and how important.
It looks like one of them only has 75 cents or $75.
So they have a ways to go.
So they need to get going.
So there have been some great startups in this class. And one of the things you learn here, I think in crazy California, is to accept that the impossible is possible. A young man in this class had this wild idea that women, wives, girlfriends are looking for sort of fun presents for the man in their life. So he came up with this crazy idea called a man crate, which you see in front of you, which is just a wooden crate, which I guess conjures up manhood in some way, because when you receive the crate, you need like a bar to open up this crate. And it's a very masculine thing. And he came up with this idea. He had no company. He had nothing, but he went out and bought some sort of silly, manly like products that he thought he might put in such a crate. And then he did a photo shoot. And then he threw up a Quip website and bought some Facebook ads. And this is where we talk about, you can prototype a business with Facebook or Google ads, with digital advertisements for something that does not exist. And why would you do that? Because you are checking demand. You're trying to see if there is this target customer, and it might be a different target customer than you anticipated. So he threw this up, and he intentionally actually wanted something kind of old-fashioned. He wanted phone calls because he wanted to talk to potential customers. And he started getting calls from wives and girlfriends who were so excited and then so angry when they found out that there was no product yet, and admonished him and said, "You have to get live. I need this." He learned incredible information. Interestingly, no one at Stanford wanted to invest in this, but he started getting incredible sales. And within about 4 years, he had $30 million in annual sales for this silly, ridiculous product that he prototyped with ads for a product that didn't exist.
Another way that the entrepreneurs and startups can get started is a Kickstarter. And we're going to tell you the story, a little short story now about Joel Heath. He's an athlete.
He's amazing. Joel was working at a big company down in Santa Barbara, and he got fired. I don't know if this has happened to any of you there, but it could be good news. He was fired from his regular corporate job. He decided he wanted to create a startup. He had a bad back and played around with creating a board which would balance on while typing on your laptop. Sounds like a silly idea, but he'd worked for a shoe company there in Santa Barbara. He worked with professionals. He began testing, sending this to a laboratory to find out an ergonomic tool, and it started to work. But he had no customers. He had no partners. And this is a physical device, which can be a little harder if you're a startup, because of course one must buy materials and set up manufacturing, very complex. So he went this route of a Kickstarter campaign, but he didn't approach it as an amateur because he had a lot of marketing and branding background. He hired a professional company to do a photo shoot, to do a first-rate video. He hired a marketing firm. He created this whole campaign, and then he put everything into it in the last few weeks. He went live with the hope of making $50,000 in advance for this product. And instead, in a few weeks, he had $500,000 in capital to begin the very difficult process, of course, of setting up manufacturing and distribution. And it's a great product. I don't know if you can get it in Europe, but it's called Fluid Stance.
Now, a Kickstarter is a great idea to force yourself to make that commitment early on. You have to really get into the details. There's a deadline. There's a campaign. You need to describe in words and images what you're offering. You become a professional. This is your product, and you are the face of it. You build a community. Some of you said this earlier in the chat, that this is one of the secrets to sales. You build a community, you start gathering names, email addresses, ways to reach people in newsletters to drum up excitement about the product. And that's your first customer base, your early adopters, very important. And you have to set a price. So you really have to make it real at this stage. Kickstarters are invaluable. In the chat now, we want to ask you, how are you going to 10x your sales? Think about some of the things we've just told you.
So we're pushing you a little bit. We're being very San Franciscan. How are you going to grow your sales? Something that can have a big exponential effect. What do you think? Eu sei que vocês têm ideias.
Well, if you get 10x, how are you going to 1x your sales?
1x, 2x, 3x. Any ideas?
Okay. We can move to our next slide and we'll wrap it up more with some helpful hints in a minute.
Okay, próxima.
Pitching, pitching. You are always pitching. I'm pitching. But maybe you think you're not very good at pitching. And maybe you're right. Well, here's a man who was not very good at pitching. In fact, this man, who's a startup founder, he's got a machine learning language teaching platform that he created. It's called Lingvist. He's an Estonian man. And he was in Techstars Accelerator. He was in one of the London-based cohorts a few years ago. Now, this man, Mike Montel, was terrified of pitching. He was so terrified. He said it stimulated his reptilian brainstem and paralyzed him with fear. So when he got up there and stood in front of the room, he would panic. And in fact, he did just that one day in the class. He collapsed on the floor. So this was not good. He was losing his own self-confidence. He knew he had a good product, but he knew that he was afraid to be the spokesperson. So he was losing the confidence of his team. And how was he ever going to get the confidence of the investors if he was lying on the floor? So guess what he did? He set himself a challenge, and he was in London. So he went out to Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park in London. It's a famous place where orators go, and they stand up on a soapbox, on a podium, and they pitch their idea. So he did this. He got up there and he shouted out his pitch again and again. People were laughing at him. People were heckling him, teasing him. But he did it anyway. And guess what? He went back after all this practice and he won the pitch contest at Techstars.
And he got a tremendous amount of investment. I think they have received 10 million euros to date.
There were on that day, there were a lot of reporters there and other people from TechCrunch who were sponsoring this event. So it was a very important event.
And we've met him several times. We met him in Estonia. We met him here. And we like this story because a lot of us are not natural at pitching. It's not something where I'm actually myself a rhetoric major. So I'm pretty natural because it's part of my degree. But many of us do not study this at university.
I did not.
And here's a man who was just terrible at it. And despite his brilliance, he was a brilliant physicist at CERN in Europe. He practiced his way to relative mastery.
In the chat, how do you practice your pitch in challenging and interesting ways?
Just tell us how you practice. Your standard ways and maybe some creative ways. How do you get ready to pitch? I know you have to pitch in class, you have to pitch your startup. How do you pitch?
Yes, different people.
Okay, we have
different feedback, different members take over the pitch. Oh, you're going so fast. Industry mentors, yes. 2
chairs in front of you. I like that. Maybe we can put a doll in each chair. Excellent. With industry mentors, pitch to random students. Oh, this is design thinking. This is great. Just pitching to random students. You never know.
Ideas. Friends and family. Good. Important to step outside of your comfort zone.
Excellent.
So great ideas.
Excellent.
So let's talk a little bit. We're at the stage. We're going to turn it over to you, but let's do a few takeaways here. We've talked today about how to sell, before you're ready. How to train your sales muscles by selling anything. Maybe it's not the thing that you really want to be selling, but you're teaching yourself how to sell. Set a 10x challenge. You want to have goals for yourself and you want to have data. Prototype digital sales. This is a great way to sell something before you're ready by creating an ad for it and seeing who bites. Try a Kickstarter to make it real. Put in words what you want to say, have a deadline, have a price, all of these things. And practice, practice, practice. Practice your pitch. Practice. I can't say that enough.
And one of the things,
Practicar.
one of the things we learned is many students would come back to the professors with plans. Instead of actually selling, they'd write a plan for selling. And he would come back and he'd say, create an advertisement, go off campus to sell to a real customer. Selling to your friends or your family is not true sales. So there was often this tension that we saw during these 10 weeks of students coming from their academic background and being very intelligent and wanting to plan everything out like a business student. And instead he was like, no, come up with a design, come up with something interesting, test it. If it works, keep doing it. If it doesn't, try another test, micro tests, very quick. So I think now what we'd like to do is open up to questions. We understand you have real startups and projects, so we're happy to answer very specific questions about your product or your service, and go for it.
You can ask us questions. You can unmute yourself, I believe, and ask a question in audio, or you can type it into the chat.
Whichever you like.
Was there something you came here today wanting to know or think about or talk about?
What would be your advice for somebody trying to build a marketplace? So the basic idea is we want to connect private investors and early stage or startups looking for funding, basically venture debt marketplace for private investors. And we are currently in the stage of also validating who are the most important or the specific target area of both startups and investors. What would be your advice on how to really validate what are the needs of both groups? Because what I understand now, we don't only have a product we're trying to sell to somebody, but we need to connect and meet the interests of both groups, you know?
It sounds fascinating. Is this throughout Europe? What is the marketplace?
Well, basically once the product, so we are trying to build the MVP on a Cardano smart contract, so the scalability would be global as well.
I guess we always think about getting what we call traction. So let's say you want this to be European, or you want it to be also in the US. It's important to prototype and start building somewhere. So depending upon, obviously you happen to be in Portugal now, but you may begin prototyping in Portugal or another country in Europe, and starting somewhere with an event with this community. And you may have envisioned the sort of global path, but you've got to start somewhere where you think you can get some meaningful traction.
And that event might be an in-person event, or it might be an online event. And the promotion of that event is going to be very important for you on social media.
And it's important with such a thing to sort of invite the right target members, the right target community. So what do we have next? Who's got, I'm sure somebody else has an interesting.
Yes, I would have a question. Thank you first of all for the talk. It was really, really interesting and I would get into the topic of storytelling. I mean, what are your advice how to create a good story? Is it like a more personal experience to connect to the listener, or what are just some general advice for us to create the story for a project?
Great and very important topic. We have worked with many executives. We're working with actually a Portuguese startup now who's coming to the US. In the US, LinkedIn is very important for business, and it's a very important social media forum. And if we're talking about storytelling for your professional life or as a founder or a company, we think it has to be very strategic. So it has to be authentic, but you also have to have a sense of who you are and who you want to become. Susana and I both worked for many magazines. I worked for a couple of famous magazines. Magazines have something they call the book, which is what entails sort of the vision of that magazine. And I think you have to think in a similar way about your book. And you have to also, as a rhetoric major, think about your audience. So your intention must meet your audience. And often there's a prototyping, a sort of design thinking discovery phase where you can't always know your audience, which is kind of a beautiful thing. You may discover you have a larger audience in a target audience that you might not have anticipated.
I would also say in a simple way, so when you are thinking about this audience, you can create a persona or a number of personas for those people in your audience, characterize them, describe them in detail. Is it a young professional woman? Is it a CEO,
Investor,
or an investor? And then you can tell stories that of people who mirror that type. So you can create a story with a very good hook, an emotional hook that starts out with some dramatic pain or problem that a kind of person who's reflective of that audience persona is having. And then and that will create some empathy with the audience members,
and today
who find themselves in that character and want to hear that story.
The reality today is you have to be both essentially a journalist and a bit of an author, but you also have to be collaborative, because startups and entrepreneurship is about teamwork. So you have to be generous when colleagues or other professionals that's in this area that you want to build a footprint, you have to applaud them, and you should applaud them, but with some wisdom that you attach to something they've done or something they've achieved. For instance, you may have heard of, there's a gentleman in Portugal, Ricardo Marvão. He's quite famous. He built a famous incubator there, and he has a huge following there. And he always is commenting, there's a triple unicorn that reached triple unicorn status. He, wrote about this. It's called Remote. It's actually a San Francisco, Lisboa unicorn. He wrote about this. It's not his company, but it becomes part of his brand. So I think that's a very important thing, that you have to be knowledgeable about others, and you can't be, purely egotistical.
Yeah, don't tell stories that are only all about you and your product. You need to branch out from there so people will feel you are more genuinely interested in the topic of something outside of yourself.
Okay, who's next? Quem quer falar? Fala. Somebody.
We have about 10 more minutes.
Come on. Não seja tímida.
let's give you a prompt again. What did you come here wanting to know? What have we not answered something for you? Or have you come up with some great new ideas today and you want to talk about those?
Something you want to try. Tenta fazer. I know somebody. Okay, here we go. Somebody's thinking. Here we go. Boa.
Okay, I'll break the silence. My name is Mattia. I do not have a project with Forward program, but I'm a junior buddy mentor. That's
Okay.
me coming from a program called Bring Entrepreneurs Together, from association called Bring Entrepreneurs Together, and we are kind of also helping with the knowledge we know, which is humble but still helping, and it's a learning process for us. So therefore I can say that listening to you and listening to the whole pitches today and to other senior buddy mentors, it was a great learning experience. And it was a great idea listening to the examples of Stanford students, how they were creative, thought out of the box. So I found that personally very useful, not the puppies or donations, but the way they stopped and said, okay, let's, because when you asked us how the lemonade, I found myself thinking inside the box compared to them. And that was a great click, let's say.
Right. And, you know, the reality is I both have an academic background, but also an athletic background. I was actually a very top football player, football europeo. And so I learned from football and the sports that you have to train, right? That you have to be very serious, that everyone thinks about the game, but behind the game is years of training. And the problem with most young startups is they have years or a decade or more of academic, but they have no sales. So it's as if they were soccer players who never touched the ball, right? And that's why we think every entrepreneur would benefit, whether it's selling your real product or just creating a creative game where you sell something, you know, at a shopping mall, or, you know, some kind of interaction, because we greet people from all over the world here in San Francisco. I've done lectures here for people from 22 different countries. And almost always the weakest area is sales, is pitching, is marketing. And when we say that, we mean it for the whole spectrum, from the pure pitch of the startup to meeting someone at a networking event who might invest in your company. And your pitch might be 30 seconds. And if you succeed in 30 seconds, they might invest or introduce you to someone. And if you fail, they turn and talk to someone else.
We find this to be true too at trade shows. So for example, at Web Summit, where there are which is in Portugal, where there are thousands of startups there out on the floor set with their booths. We went to Web Summit a few times and we came up with a game that we played with the startups, because we didn't want to hear them tell us their pitch as they imagined it. We wanted to control their pitch because we didn't have time. So we would give them a time limit and we would say, okay, quick, tell us about your product. What's the pain you're trying to solve? Who is your target customer? What is your secret special sauce? What are you doing that's better than anybody else in creating this product? And finally, how are you going to sell it? And what we found is that they would be pretty good in the beginning. And then when we got to the sales question, sometimes they wouldn't exactly know. They would say, oh, well, we're going to partner with a corporate sponsor. And okay, but
How?
Details. So you got to work out those details.
Right. And you have to be able to, we call it sort of improvise. You have to be able to talk on your feet. What most young startups don't realize is when you actually get a real meeting with investors, they will quickly interrupt you and quickly throw questions at you, like a Supreme Court judge. And if you answer well, it keeps going. If you answer poorly, they are done. They don't have any more interest. And there are many bad answers to these questions. A good answer is, that's a great question. Let me find out and come back to you. It's the yes and mentality, which you only learn in the battle, and you become stronger that way. So the more you can put yourself in such sort of simulating real life situations, the stronger and more flexible you will be as an entrepreneur.
I think we have time for one more question.
I'd have one based on what Mattia asked before. I mean, you showed great example of people thinking outside the box, and then maybe that the question is more twofold. Do you think that's something one can learn, or somebody's born with to really think outside the box and not use existing frameworks as reference? Because as a founder, I think a lot of, when building your startup, you always tend to reference either an existing business model or a product or whatever, and compare yourself to where others are at or whatever. So basically, do you think you can learn it, and what would be your best tips for actually thinking outside the box?
Great question. We do teach a class that's with creativity in the title. Creativity, innovation, and applied design. So we believe that, yes, you can learn creativity, and your creativity is a muscle.
Yeah, and some of it is unlearning the less helpful parts of your academic background, and surrounding, our new book is about entrepreneurial archetypes. So we think each of you benefit by having a team of people that is diverse. And it might be diverse in terms of men and women, it might be diverse in nationalities, but equally important, is diverse in how you think. We do think that people are different, and some people might be more naturally, we would say, fora da caixa, like thinking out of the box, right? And others might not, but they might have other benefits. And we think the way you do start to think out of the box is you immerse yourself in different business models, in different creative marketing and branding approaches. There's a lot to learn from modern and even classical marketing and branding, which were out of the box. Like, we have an example of the Volkswagen, right? Which, when the Volkswagen was first introduced, they had an advertisement which showed the car as almost a tiny dot in the corner, which is small is beautiful, right? So you can take something that might be seen as a negative and turn it into a positive if you have the right story. So I think you can always challenge yourself. I will say, is this idea pretty good, but kind of average? Push yourself to dream and have a couple other approaches. Well, we want to thank you all.
A few tips and tricks for us to improve on our creativity. I'm not, as Matthias, I'm not in the project on forward. I'm just a buddy mentor as well. But it's something I would like to improve, and maybe with your tips and tricks, on a daily basis, I can maybe improve it. So yeah, if you had a few tricks or tips.
Well, one thing that we talk about a lot is cross-pollination. So look at your, make sure that you have a lot of inputs coming in when you're doing your research, and you're thinking about things that are, that other people who are doing things in your industry that are like what you want to do, but you need to also look at other industries to see if there's something there that you can borrow. Maybe there's a sales model that's people are using in another industry that hasn't quite made it to your industry yet. And say tokenization. So you're going to add tokenization to your model, or you are going to, for example, if you think about a physical product, Perry Claben, who created this new snowshoe, he looked at old snowshoes, but then he borrowed from bicycle frames and aeronautics to create a new kind of snowshoe.
So one of the things I've actually started, I'm happy that the physical world is back, and I'm actually doing workshops now with Brazilians. E falo português com eles aqui in San Francisco. And we do what we call customer experience discovery. So this is something you could do in Lisboa, is you actually, and I'll be happy, I can share with the professors our little map that we created. You can go to lojas there, you can go to stores, and you do an experience map, and you discover what's working, what isn't working in a very analytical way. And if you're in an interesting part of Lisboa, you will find more modern stores, which are thinking fora da caixa. For instance, at Stanford, there's a cafe that literally has about 5 different businesses within the cafe, right? So the wonderful thing about the physical world, you can go out and see, and you can ask questions. And when I do this, I either do this as students or executives, I empower them to probe, to interview, right? To take, and you can do the same. All you have to do is say you're doing a class project. I'd love to know more about your business, how you came up with this fora da caixa strategia, right? This new strategy. And
it's a great technique in stores. I'm more of an introvert, and I sometimes don't want to go in the store because I think they're going to ask me to buy something. But if you go in and you say, I'm a student, I'm doing some research, I want to ask you some questions, you kind of change that dynamic.
And they're often very excited to tell you in the good stores. In the bad stores, not so much.
Thank you very much.
And that is a great way. It's a great way to end. So thank you very, very, very much, Susana and John. It was very, very interesting. Lots of ideas, very interactive. I can see that there were lots of questions from the students. Well done. Thank you very much. And guys, the weather is slightly better, not yet nice and sunny like in California, but this is the best that we have at this stage. Thank you, everybody, and see you soon.
Okay,
So,
muito obrigado.
Thank you.
Pela
Tchau, tchau.
oportunidade.
Thank you very much.
Até breve.
Bye.